Hello everybody. Just recently I found myself driving a lot of the new crop of hybrids because there are still plenty of manufacturers out there that believe they have a place, and on paper I would certainly agree with them. For many, a full electric is simply not a car they can live with. Meanwhile, a traditional combustion engine vehicle might not also be the right solution. However, the simple truth is that most of these cars aren't that good. They aren't very nice to drive, nor are they even particularly economical. And you know what the craziest thing of all is? That's that 16 years ago, Toyota cracked it. And no, I'm not talking about the Prius. Instead, I'm talking about this, the Crown, a car so good, they didn't sell it to us. There may be a few of you currently watching this going, James, I'm pretty sure we did actually get that car, only we didn't call it the Crown. And you would be right, because this is mechanically very similar to the Lexus GS. In this car's case, the GS 450h of the same era.
This is a member of the 13th generation of Crown, a nameplate that dates back to 1955 and is still on sale today, now in its 16th generation. Unlike the two previous Crowns featured on the channel, an 11th generation Athlete and a 12th generation based Majesta, this one has not been brought to me by JDM regular Brad, but instead a lovely chap called Stephen, who is selling it because his commute to work is now just 5 miles, rendering the hybrid's fuel economy unnecessary, and because he fancies going overlanding. Versatile though it may be, the Crown isn't that versatile, so instead he has his sights set on another Toyota icon, the Land Cruiser.
And for those unfamiliar with the nameplate, it is considered by Toyota one of their most prestigious, not the highest in the entire model lineup, that would be the Century, but still a car that bears a significance for the company. That is one of the reasons it even has its own badge. In here, you're not really going to see a Toyota logo, instead you'll see the Crown. And in terms of cars that may be more familiar to you, this is really equivalent to the likes of a BMW 5 Series or a Mercedes E-Class. It's about 4.8 and a bit meters long, 1.8 meters wide, making it roughly the same size as one of those cars. However, it does have a few luxury touches you don't always see in those, so in some ways you could see it as a nice halfway house between the likes of a 5 and maybe a 7 Series. For this car, which was introduced in 2008, there were 4 trim levels available. You had the Crown Royal, then you had the Crown Athlete, the slightly more sporting model. On top of that, you then had the Crown Majesta, which was even more luxurious than the Royal, and then this, the Hybrid, which was both its own trim level and also engine. If you didn't want the hybrid, you had a selection of other power plants, purely combustion engine ones, including the lovely Toyota V8, which made 390 horsepower. And on the topic of power, trying to work out exactly how much this makes was actually reasonably difficult. First off, it being a Japanese domestic market model, there isn't really that much in the way of reviews or literature in English. So last night, my other half and I sat down to do a little bit of translation work. She conveniently lived in Japan for a year and does both speak and read a little bit of it, so she helped me decipher the Toyota brochure, which handily is still available on the Toyota website. And if you are a bit of an anorak like myself, I'll put the link to that website in the description down below because it's amazing. More of a mini site really. It was built to celebrate 75 years of the company, and it's got information on just about everything that they've made up until about 2012 when they were celebrating that milestone. So though it's a little bit janky and a little bit old, as all ancient websites are, it's absolutely fascinating and a genuine goldmine if you want information particularly on obscure cars. Anyway, this car has your 3.5 litre 2GR FSE engine up the front. That is the direct injection version of the engine that may be familiar to many, particularly people like myself who had it in the Lotus Evora. You also got it in the Exige, and of course it appeared in a whole host of other Toyotas. It makes on its own 296 horsepower, 300 PS, and 370 Newton meters of torque. That's about 270 pound-foot. It is then joined by an electric motor that itself makes 200 horsepower and 200 pound-foot of torque, 270 Newton meters. If you added those two together, that would give you a rather meaty 500 horsepower. But Toyota themselves actually claim that the total output of the two combined is more like 345. A peak torque figure I simply could not obtain. Even in spite of the fact that it's clearly never using its full potential, it's still a relatively decent performer, being able to do the 0 to 62 dash in around 5.5 seconds. The car is also relatively lithe, weighing in at just 1.84 tons, which for something both in this class and also with a hybrid motor is fairly impressive. There are of course elements that date it. I couldn't find out the actual capacity of the battery pack, nor specific figures for how far the car will go driven purely in EV mode, but I can tell you the battery itself is nickel metal hydride. 20 years ago it was a fairly commonplace thing, but today, even for the likes of camera batteries, it's been generally replaced by usually lithium-based technology, and of course today a lot of other stuff too. Down in the center console here you'll find a number of different buttons to control the way the car deploys its power, including one to force it into electric only mode, an eco button, the traction control off switch, and a little rocker to enable you to choose either snow or sport. And I'm going to choose sport, put my foot down and see what this car is like when you want to have a bit of fun. Now, while the basics of the powertrain sound fairly appealing, meaty, naturally aspirated V6 engine, chunky, hybrid power, and all sent to the rear wheels, the elephant in the room here is the gearbox, because, as with just about every Toyota and Lexus hybrid, this car uses a form of CVT, which is both good and bad. Let's start with the bad, shall we? Yes, it makes CVT noises. Put your foot down and the engine just goes rather than a rev counter. You instead have a power gauge telling you exactly how much of it you are asking, and that really is the way it does feel like it delivers its go. And it does have plenty of it. More than that though, and this really is the best thing I can say about the Toyota CVT, is that it's one of the few genuinely seamless ways to make a hybrid powertrain work. And it is my understanding that is why the company has stuck with it. Most other hybrids that I've experienced, you can tell very clearly when the car switches from either pure EV to hybrid or then to pure combustion. This though, it delivers its power in a smooth and really quite fabulous way. It is a very effortless car to drive. And that fits the image of the whole thing really. This is a luxury saloon car. And though a 5 Series, an E-Class, an A6 are going to be more dynamic, this still has quite a bit going for it. There is nothing fancy in terms of all-wheel steer or the like, but the car does have a few party pieces up its sleeve, including GPS-controlled adaptive suspension. Whether it actually works in Britain or not, I couldn't say, and I'm gonna hazard a guess that it doesn't. But the theory goes this car used its inbuilt navigation software to know where it was and set the suspension up for the approaching corner, which is really, really quite nifty tech even in 2024, and in 2008 that would have sounded like witchcraft. Other things the car has which are luxury favourites include fully automatic windows on all 4 corners, soft closed doors on all 4 corners. You also have a sunroof, which I really do appreciate. The blind is manually retractable, but the roof itself will open electrically, and it's really rather pleasant. In fact, I'm going to have a little bit of that now actually. Oh crikey, blimey. That was a bit of a thud. I don't think anyone's opened that for a while. The turning circle's actually also pretty good too. Getting up to speed is nice and easy. You have an all-digital display down here as well. That also would have been rather unusual in 2008. It's bright, clear, easy to read, hasn't got any dead pixels or the like. It's pretty good. In the center here you've got a setup which is still in mostly Japanese, and it's been left on the screen that shows me exactly what the hybrid setup is doing, which I quite like and appreciate. You have the swinging air vents, should you want them, though I'm not exactly sure how to turn them off. And you've also got heated, ventilated seats in the back. They recline, and unusually for some of the Japanese cars I've been driving recently, it even has quite a bit of leather on the interior. This is then combined with wood, and it gives you a really nice sensation of being in something just a little bit classier. And naturally, the entire interior has this very Japanese feeling of everything having been thought through. Every control, everything that you touch or manipulate, though it may not look like the fanciest, it feels right. It just works. Case in point, the little cover down here that hides some of the infotainment system. It's smooth, it's elegant, it's quiet. The little rocker here for the heating and cooling for the seats. It's brilliantly set up, really nice. I just like it. In sport mode, that petrol engine is fairly keen to kick into action, so I'm going to put it back into its default eco mode and see what that is like. Though you can still tell, and I would expect this to be normal at higher speeds, the engine is there, it's willing to use a little bit less of it and rely more on the electric power to give you a slightly more luxurious drive. What I do find fascinating, though, is that the car is actually very, very keen to turn in. Though the rack itself doesn't feel particularly quick, you can sense the way the car's geometry has been set up means that it's actually a lot more agile than you might expect. If you told me it did have four-wheel steer, I would believe you. It doesn't. It does, though, have a central airbag. In fact, it's got airbags everywhere. Some of them are a world first. It even has, I think as an option, a system down here that can tell if you're paying attention to the road and if your eyes are open. That's quite trick. It was also one of the first cars in the entire world to have forward collision assist. There's even blinds for all of the rear windows, with the one at the back being electrically operated and the two on the side being manual. There was even, and again I'm not sure if this was standard or optional, I'd wager the latter, a night vision assist system designed to tell you whether an errant deer or child had run out in front of you. Alright then, what's not so great about the car? Well, for one, the suspension. Though it is allegedly adaptive, there are certainly no buttons in here to manually override it. And it does feel like it couldn't make its mind up whether it wanted to be luxurious or sporty. And you do get moments where the car seems to have a lot of movement in it, and then others where it doesn't have anywhere near enough. It's certainly not what I call bad, and if anything I think this is likely to appeal more to the sportier driver, which is a shame because the hybrid badge is just as likely to put that driver off. Though there is a good amount of room in the back seats, partly on account I think of the hybrid drive, the boot isn't quite so generous. Though it's not small, for a car in this class, it's not particularly good either. I have also been struggling just a little bit to get on with both the steering and the brakes. The latter I'm getting used to, but they are quite heavily servoed, and you may have been able to see in a couple of the earlier shots, I was struggling to bring this car to a stop smoothly. The steering, though, it's just a bit too heavily assisted for me, and I think this is probably the sort of thing you'd expect for a luxury car, and I suppose for the intended buyer, likely an elderly Japanese gentleman, it's about right. But I do wish it was just a touch weightier. In its defense, there is some texture, some feel coming through, but it's also just so heavily helped that you need to listen very, very carefully for that information. Otherwise, you will miss it. And it makes it just not quite the sporty drive that the suspension wants the car to have. Visibility is good. This B-pillar's a little further forward than I would like it, but overall I can see everything I need to, and for reversing you do have a camera. The car being narrow and not too long also means that for the majority of UK parking spaces you should be just about okay. There is plenty of adjustment in these seats. They're also nice and comfortable, and you even have a couple of switches here so you can adjust the passenger one. Though the weirdest thing of all, I think, is the fact you've got massive grab handles on the back of them for the passengers in the rear. I mean, how fast is Mrs. Yamada thinking you're gonna go? Weird. But in good news, that hybrid system does at least seem to be contributing something. First off, around town, it's perfectly pleasant. It's a lovely car to drive. Even at car park speeds, it's smooth, responsive, always has plenty of power, and, as already mentioned, that transition from pure electric to hybrid is genuinely seamless. And on account of the fact the power specifications are generous, you never feel like you're in anything remotely underpowered. This car has quite a bit of shove in it. And for me, the coup d'etat, well, it is actually relatively economical. I say relatively because we have to remind ourselves this is still a near 2-ton luxury car with 350 horsepower. But even at its absolute worst, Stephen reports this has got just shy of 30 to the gallon, and on longer European trips, he's achieved over 40. Which is fantastic, because to be perfectly honest, those are similar numbers to what I've got from some far more modern, far less exciting, far slower hybrids that really were nowhere near as nice to drive as this. So then, if I've got you convinced, what are you going to pay for one of these? Well, the sensible thing to do, of course, would be to go and buy a Lexus GS. And truthfully, I'm not exactly sure what you'd be paying for one of those, but if you do want that JDM cool factor, and I can appreciate why you would, this exact car is currently up for sale and is the only one of its type at £8,200. And if I were to look at it through the lens of a luxury car, I think it's actually good value. Full stop. Yes, you can get an S-Class 7 Series or the like for cheaper than this, but they are going to be harder work. They are going to be much more expensive to maintain. This has got just about enough in it to make you feel like it's a more high-class car, but also not a whole bunch of tech that you're never going to use but is likely to break. And it should be fairly decent, reliable, and something you could live with day to day, particularly if you want to learn Japanese. So, that I think is enough on that. As ever, I want to say a big thank you to Stephen for bringing his car out, and to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.